Hey everyone, this is Daniel Wildberger from the Interaction Design program at Carr, University of Art and Design. Now welcome to our workshop series. This workshop was created to give you an introduction to motion design using Adobe After Effects, a powerful animation and VFX tool. It has proven to be very useful for video prototyping interfaces and user experiences. The series is made of 3 parts. In this first one, we're going to give you an overview of the program's interface while focusing on the use and manipulation of animation properties through keyframes. Let's jump right in. I hope you enjoyed the first episode of the workshop, Motion Graphics for UI and UX. So let's begin the workshop by mentioning a few things. One of the things I want to mention is the importance of motion design to interaction designers. So time-based design is important to us. Why? Well, experiences, they are really also time-based. They happen over time. And having the skill set to design considering time and thinking about transitions, thinking about speed, thinking about sequence, it's a huge skill set to have for an interaction designer. One of the stories that I want to talk about, and possibly, well, I guess the main story that I want to talk about in this presentation has to do with a person. His name is Edward Muybridge. Muybridge was a famous photographer. He began his career as a photographer, famously taking pictures of state parks, famously taking pictures of Yosemite Park. He became really well known by showing these large format, amazing pictures that really show the monumental force and impact of nature at Yosemite. He became kind of a figure and became really well known. The governor of California, who was a racehorse owner, wanted to make a point about something. So he was a horse fanatic, and he would spend time discussing with his friends, and he had this question in his head. He wasn't so sure, and others were not so sure either, if the horse, once it runs, is the horse always with the 4 feet or at least one of the 4 feet on the ground? And this was something that was really hard to tell at the time. It's not something that the eye could really capture because it's super fast, and our eyes, they don't have that capability. And so how could they prove that? Well, photography was really changing our perception of the world and our perception of nature. So they decided to invite Muybridge. The governor thought, oh, let's invite the photographer Muybridge to see if we can run an experiment, see if we can gather some proof if the horses, once they run, are they really with at least 1 foot on the ground, or do they actually have a moment in which they are, quote unquote, flying? It was supposed to bring evidence about something that was invisible to the human eye. And to do this, Muybridge, who was a pretty technical person also, he decided to do something pretty interesting, pretty unusual. He understood that it would be really difficult to really capture that just taking like a single shot with a camera, or trying to take multiple shots as fast as he could. No, he knew that he had to be faster. So he had to come up with something different. He had to come up with some kind of a mechanism. So what he did was he placed numerous large cameras in a line along the edge of a track. And since once the horse was running, the cameras, they would be activated by a thread. What is amazing about this is, they could prove this theory, this hypothesis that the horse, once it runs, there's a moment in which all 4 feet are floating above the ground, but also they discovered something amazing. They discovered that motion, reality, so to speak, could be replicated by playing a sequence of images really fast. The horse in motion is one of those moments in which technology is showing us the world in such a unique way, in a way that has never been perceived or seen before. It is this combination of engineering, science, invention, curiosity, art. There's a certain number of frames that once they're played during a short amount of time, that will create this illusion. Nowadays we have been able to look at those frame per second rates as rates for animation, rates for video, rates for cinema. Early animators, they started working in low frame rates, for instance, like 12 frames per second rates. So doubling from 12, doubling to 24, it's actually what cinema uses or has been using for many, many years. Of course, now we have technology to do that way faster, but the feeling of the 24 frames per second is so much associated to the experience of cinema that even knowing that we can actually do way more frames per second, we still kind of retain that 24 FPS as almost like the ideal poetic aesthetic of cinema. So we still use that to this day. 30 FPS is what a lot of video formats use. Video, it's actually faster than cinema, which is kind of an interesting fact. There's also video with 60 frames per second, which is much faster. Muybridge was this inventor, right? So he invented this mechanism to capture the horse. He also invented some early forms of projecting, early forms of actually watching this phenomena, watching animation. And these things, they would be shown in parks and events and in fairs, and people would make lines just to watch this kind of magical thing happening. The illusion of movement, the illusion of life. So if we speak in terms of understanding motion graphics, understanding how the images become motion, the images become animation, how they create the illusion of movement, there's something that it's really key for us to grasp. So let's picture this. Let's imagine something. If I have a circle, and let's say I have this circle on the plane and I want to make this circle travel from one place to another. Let's say I want to have this circle travel from point A to point B. What is happening behind the scenes? What is happening behind the curtains here? Well, it's a transition. So it goes from a state to another, a place to another. There is a beginning place, and then there's an end place. There's a beginning state, and then there's an end state. So if I want to move the circle from position A to B, I have to think of a sequence of images, a sequence of images that will gradually show this change in place. What we have here is a representation of a 30 FPS, 30 frames being used here to actually depict the whole motion. So the initial and the final states of any type of motion, they are key to the animation. and they are called keyframes. So in this case, I would have a keyframe which represents point A, the initial state, and then another one that represents the end state, point B. Now, understanding keyframes is fun if we try to understand it through animation principles. A couple of animators, they used to work at the Walt Disney Studio, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. As they worked in their animations, they were really incredible at their craft. They came up with this list of things or principles that, once used in their work, would enhance and increase the expressiveness of the animation. The Illusion of Life, it's the name of the most famous book published by Frank and Ollie. So it became an instant classic in the animation field. It's also the name of an amazing video made by Cento Lodigiani to demonstrate these principles. What is amazing about this video that I'm going to show is that it's just incredible to see how a square or a cube, a form that we do not associate with life by any way or mean, becomes a living being.
The following has been paraphrased from The Illusion of Life by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. Squash and stretch. This action gives the illusion of weight and volume to a character as it moves. Anticipation. Prepares the audience for a major action the character is about to perform. Each major action is preceded with specific moves that anticipate for the audience what is about to happen. Staging. It's the presentation of an idea so that it is clear. Straight ahead and pose to pose. Pose to pose is charted with key drawings done at intervals throughout the scene. Straight ahead animation starts at the first drawing and works drawing to the end of a scene. Follow through and overlapping. When the main body of the character stops, all other parts continue to catch up to the main mass. Nothing stops all at once. Slow in and slow out. As the action starts, we have more drawings near the starting pose, one or two in the middle, and more drawings near the next pose. Fewer drawings make the action faster, and more drawings make the action slower. Arcs. All actions, with few exceptions, follow an arc or slightly circular path. Arcs give animation a more natural action and better flow. Secondary action. It's an additional action in the scene used as a supplement of the main one in order to reinforce it and add more dimension. Timing. More drawings between poses slow and smooth the action. Fewer drawings make the action faster and crisper. Timing maintains the appearance of an object abiding by the laws of physics. Exaggeration. Remain true to reality, just presenting it in a wild or more extreme form. Solid drawings. It means taking into account forms in three-dimensional space, giving them volume and weight. Appeal. It's a quality of charm, able to please the viewer's eyes. It's the charisma of the action. In motion graphics, we are not really, in most cases, animating characters or heroes or not necessarily living things, but we are animating elements and color and shape and form and type. So some of these are more important to us at first. In terms of understanding keyframes,
the principle of straight ahead and pose to pose is probably the one that we have to understand first. So let's see if we can unpack this. So the notion of straight ahead means creating the frames one by one, as many frames per second necessary, as a sequence, going starting with the first one and then just animating one and the next until you reach the end point of the action. Here is another amazing video that shows straight ahead animation through a flipbook. So if that's straight ahead, we go from one to the next in a linear fashion. Pose to pose is what it's closer to, it's happening in the animation software. It's closer to what is happening in After Effects, for instance, because it considers the poses, it considers the key moments first. So you plan that first, and then you figure out all of the drawings that you need to add in between. So on the pose-to-pose technique, you draw the key poses first, so you get the most out of those key moments. And then you make sure that you have all the in-between drawings to make it happen. What is kind of neat about this is that you realize that you can, if you add more drawings in between, you can have a slower movement. And if you have less drawings in between, you have a faster movement. So you start to consider also the timing of the action. So there is more control. It's a technique that it's an advancement. No, it's a step forward from the straight ahead technique. It makes you have more like a stronger planning of the action. You have those points of references, the keyframes, the poses, the starting and the end point of the transitions. So the pose-to-pose principle of animation is very similar to thinking of keyframes. And the software, like I was mentioning before, makes use of this idea, makes use of this technique. After Effects, which is our tool in this workshop, makes use of keyframes. So the software uses that to create the animation. The computer fills in all the in-betweens of the keyframes to create the illusion of movement. So now that we know that, let's head over to After Effects to begin animating. Okay everyone, so we're finally in the last part of the workshop. We're going to be looking at the interface. Here in After Effects, we're going to look at some of its main panels, some of the tools, the timeline, the layers, and things like that. So I just opened the program, so I'm running the program. I'm trying to simulate the most out-of-the-box situation here. I guess one thing to keep in mind is that After Effects has different workspaces. Workspaces are basically what defines the layout of the interface, and it comes, After Effects comes with different pre-made setups that you can use. You can also customize your own, which is what most of us do. It's what I prefer to do anyway. But how do I access these workspaces? Well, two different ways here to quickly access different workspaces. One is under the menu, under window, you should be able to access all of the pre-made workspaces there. So you see you have different options as far as all panels, animation, color, etc. Default workspace. I'm using Essential Graphics for this demo, but just to kind of quickly show you what happens if we change this, I'm gonna change this to default, for instance. So there's like a, I don't know if you noticed that, but there's like a subtle change on the right hand side panel here, configuration. I guess that's too similar. Let me try something a little bit more drastic here. Maybe, let's see, I'm just gonna play around a little bit. Color, so I chose color for color grading, color correction, and you see it's a whole different organization of windows and panels. So just be aware of that. You can also access some workspaces through this area on the top right, where you see default is there. You have learn, which I'm not so sure the purpose of that one, but you have standard, you have small screen, and things like that. So I'm gonna go back to the one I prefer, the one I'll be using in this demo, which is the Essential Graphics. Okay, so if you are familiar with the Adobe Suite, this should feel also familiar to you, especially in terms of the tools. It has a set of tools. The menu with tools, or the toolbar, it's on the top left of the screen, sorry. And you can see them there. So you will be able to see a lot of familiar faces here. You have the hand tool, the selection tool, which may look a little bit different, but it's for selecting there. You have the zoom tool, rotation, camera, pan behind, which is also known as the anchor point tool. I'll show you that in a minute. We have rectangle, pan, type, brush, rubber stamp, and others. On the center stage here, we have the composition panel, which is the main panel for watching, previewing the videos, the projects. To the left, we have the project panel, which is basically a panel where all of your assets will be listed. And so After Effects uses an asset system. So it's basically everything that you're making is made out of different pieces and parts that come from different sources. So let's say you have a photo or some kind of a photo file that you may have prepared in Photoshop. Well, you can import it into After Effects, and then you'll see the file listed in this area. It'll be showing up in this panel. You can also bring in audio, for instance. If you import audio, it'll also show up here on the left-hand side under Project. So this is kind of, yeah, it's a list of assets. It'll be showing here. It's kind of similar to also, if you are in XD, you have similar things. If you are in Illustrator, in Design, you also have like a panel with your assets. If you are importing assets from external sources. If you are creating things in here as well, like compositions, movies, they could also appear in the project section. There are certain elements that you can create also, like shapes, that would also appear in the project panel. To the right, we have a lot of different useful panels, like the Align panel. We have the Character panel for type, paragraph. Tracker is for, well, it's for a video effect, something that we'll look at much later. Audio, preview, it's for playing the compositions you create. And many different video effects you can find in this panel right here. If you need to access all of these panels, and there are a lot of them, you'll also be able to find them under Window. So if I click on Window on the menu, you see that all of these panels that you have, well, you have some of them selected here on my interface. I'm using again Essential Graphics as my workspace. You will find more of them under Windows. So all of these guys right here, they are also panels, and you can do a lot of interesting stuff with them. Finally, underneath here we have the timeline, and the timeline, it's where a lot of the magic happens, so to speak, because this is where we're going to be keyframing. This is where we're going to be building the hierarchy of the image with layers. We can bring in, once again, images, we can bring in vector graphics, we can bring in videos, we can bring in audio, and organize them here. Now, why is this called composition? Well, the thing is, in After Effects, if you save a After Effects file, you have a project. So you're creating a project, and the project is made out of compositions. So the way to think about that is, imagine that, for instance, that you have a movie, and let's say the movie is your project, right? So the movie is made out of many parts or many scenes, and so the scenes are the compositions. Okay, so there's a bit of a hierarchy there. So the compositions are the parts of your larger project that you are building typically. That's how it usually happens. So a composition is basically something that you're building on the timeline, which will be made of layers, and it's also time-based. We're going to be playing a little bit with that in a second as well. So I have this empty project. It's untitled, it's an empty project. I'm gonna start doing things in here. I guess I could start, for instance, by creating a new composition. So I'm gonna click on the shortcut so we can start looking at that. So once we click in new compositions, we have the composition settings, we have the choice in terms of, we can choose in terms of size, we can choose in terms of the FPS that I was talking about a second ago, the frame rate. Right now I have it set up to 30 frames per second. We have also the start of the time code, which typically should start at 0. Duration in seconds or minutes. So you have a time code. Right now it's showing kind of a funny duration here. I'm gonna bring that down to 5 seconds, for instance. So I would do a 0500. So this would be 5 seconds. So you may be thinking, oh, what are the 2 zeros to the right of the 5? Well, those are the frames. So you can have, from the left to the right, we have frames. And then from 30 frames and then going up, we have seconds. And then from 60 seconds and up, we have minutes. And then from 60 minutes and up, we have hours. Okay, so this is the time code. For the composition, you can choose a background color. Right now I have pink, I don't know why, but I'm gonna change that to the default black. And I think that's good. Oh, the size I'm using, I'm using HD size. It's 1920 by 1080 pixels. Because this is a screen software, it's pixel based, so I'm gonna click on OK so we can take a look at the decomposition window here. So now I can see the composition, I can see the black background that I have set up. I have a screen, and right now it's empty. I don't have anything yet. So let me show you something that you can add into this, just so we can do kind of a test. On the top menu, again, under layer, you can add different kinds of layers. And so under layer and new, you see some of the different kinds. There are many different kinds of layers, as you can see, that you can add to a project in here. You can add text. You can add a solid. What is a solid? We don't know yet, but I'll show you in a second. We can add lights. Let's say you want to add lights to a scene or animation. You can add cameras also. You can add a null object, a shape, an adjustment layer to adjust the colors or the quality of the image, and many other things. You can even add a Photoshop and a Cinema 4D file. A Cinema 4D file would be a 3D type of file. So I'm going to choose a solid. So a solid, it's kind of a useful type of element that you can add in your timeline and in your compositions. It doesn't look like very exciting at first, so I'm going to show you the way it looks. I have the preferences for the solid. Right now it'll have the same size of my screen, and usually that's kind of a default. That's how it comes at first. So you even have a button to choose make comp size, so it'll have the exact size of the composition. I can also choose a color, so I'm going to choose a very different color for my solid. I guess I'm going to choose green. Here we go. And then I'm going to hit OK. Now, my composition has one element. I just added one element to the composition. It's a solid. So right now, if you look at the timeline, and these panels, by the way, they are adjustable. So I can slide them over to adjust to my taste. I have my first layer. And you see that there's like a bar or strip right next to where the timeline is. Well, that shows that like the duration of this image on the timeline. So right now you can see that the bar is taking the whole timeline, which means that I have a full 5 seconds of this solid on the screen. Could I change that? Yes, you can. I can change that. If you hover over to the edges of this bar, you will see that you have the ability to actually reduce the time this element lives on the timeline. So right now it's much shorter. As you can see here, it has only 1 second of duration. So my playhead, it's in an area where there is nothing. But if I move my playhead over to this area, the solid shows up. So it shows up because you can see that bar indicating that it's live in that section. What else can we do? So I'm gonna extend this again. And I have this large solid. So what if I don't want to have such a large solid? Well, I can, if you see the bounding, the boxes around the shape, so you can adjust the size if you want. So I'm just gonna change the size of this so I can play around with this a little bit. Okay. I'm just gonna do a square like that. So the element itself has those boxes for manipulation, for changing the size, so you can manipulate that on the screen. It also has this element right at the center. That's the anchor point. What is the anchor point? Well, it's kind of the point of reference. So if you are making a bit more complex animations, you might need to have that anchor point in a different spot, perhaps to do maybe an interesting rotation. So you have to move this thing to another point. So to exemplify what I'm saying here, let me just show you the properties that all the layers have in After Effects. So on the layer right here, to the left, in this area where it says lime gold solid, lime green, not gold solid, there's like a little drop down, and then I click on that and it shows transform. I click on that again, I can see some properties, and these are super important to understand these properties. This is where the keyframing happens, okay? So you can keyframe these things, so you can animate these things. So you have the possibility to animate the anchor point, that actual guy that I was talking about just a second ago. You can animate position. You can animate scale, the size of your elements. You can animate rotation, and you can also animate opacity. The values to those are on the right in blue. Everything that you see in blue on the timeline is stuff that you can keyframe. Just to show you the anchor point, what it does, it's kind of a pivot point. So I'm going to change the values for the rotation. Right now it's setting, it has a 0 degree rotation, so it's just out of the box like that. But if I change the degrees, you see that it starts to rotate. So what is happening there, it's rotating around that anchor point. So that's the point. That's the reference point that I was mentioning before. If I want to change that, there's a tool that you can use to change the placement of that anchor point. And the tool is the pen behind or anchor point tool. There's a shortcut for that, which is the Y letter. So I'm going to click on this and just change the position of the anchor point real quick. I'll put it around that corner, for instance. And now if I change the rotation here, you see how it completely changes the pivot point for that motion. Okay? So I'm going to go back, undo. Undo is Command Z. And Command Z, as always in these Adobe software and most of the digital software nowadays, you can undo also under the menu and then undo. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Let's see what else we can do here. Well, I could do some animation with this solid, and you may not be too excited with the solid because, well, what is that? It's just a square? Well, yeah, it's actually, I like to look at it as a plane, a bidimensional plane or two-dimensional plane. And you can do a lot of stuff with solids. There are certain type of effects, and there are many effects here, that you would be able to use using a solid. You can also use it for background color or even for creating full animations with it if you are creative. How do I keyframe? Since I have this thing on the timeline, I can just quickly show you how to do some keyframing. Okay, so I have, for instance, position. The position property, it has a what it looks like a round symbol right to the left of the word position. That's the keyframing icon. So if I click on that circle, it shows up more clearly like a stopwatch. So if I click on that also, it becomes blue and it adds a diamond to the left. The diamond represents the creation of the keyframe. Also the color blue means that we are keyframing. So I'm keyframing this position. It also on the timeline, it shows the diamond itself there. So this is my keyframe, the one I just created. So I'm keyframing this position is exactly where my anchor point is. And it's marking on the 15 frame time. So it's roughly, well, it's exactly half a second into the composition. Now I'm gonna move my playhead all the way forward, let's say to 2 seconds, and this is 2 seconds. Remember this composition, I have set this composition with 5 seconds total. Now if I do a little bit of a change in position here, I'm going to use my selection tool and oh, look at that, slide it over to the right. Oh, look, see what it's appearing here? This is the motion path that's being created. It shows the direction of my motion. It also shows a lot of little dots Those are the in-between frames. So all of those frames that I have in between the 2-second mark and the 15 frame mark, they are represented by dots. After I place my playhead in ahead of time on the 2-second mark, and I changed that position, it automatically created another keyframe. And now I actually have motion. I have this transition here from point A, 15 frame mark, the original position I had, and then on the 2-second mark I have another keyframe with the new position that I just created. While I was moving the square, I was holding the shift key to kind of keep the direction straight. So it's also a convention from these different types of Adobe software. But if I don't hold the shift, I actually have full, the ability to have a full range of motion here. But I want to keep it straight. So how do I play this? So I'm going to put this back at 0. I'm going to put the playhead back at 0. And remember that I mentioned that we have a preview panel on the right. So there's a little control buttons. I have the play control and the stop control right there. So I'm going to click play so I can watch this. And there you go. Now we can see the motion. And once you hit play, it loops the composition. So it's going to be looping that over and over. If I want to stop, I can click on that same place. Now it shows with the stop icon, and then I can stop it. Another way to play is to press the space bar, and it'll do the same thing. Actually, if you look at the preview panel under shortcut, it says space bar. You can actually choose different shortcuts for hitting play and stop. Okay, I'm going to stop this. And okay, so a lot of the basics I'm giving here just to get started. Because I created a composition, look at the project panel. It has a composition. It shows up with a little comp 1 icon, meaning it's this composition. You see it matches the name that I have under here in the layer and timeline area. It also shows solids, so it shows a folder, and it shows the solid that I just created, the lime green solid 1, which is the element that I have in my composition. So everything that I create, everything that I bring in, all the elements, all the actors of my scene, they will be showing up in this area. Fantastic. So let me delete these because I want to start over again. So if you want to delete, it's as easy as pressing delete. You can delete from the project panel. You can delete from the timeline. I'm going to delete the solid. Okay, and it's gone. If I delete the composition and the solid in the project panel, also I should be able to do that. Because it's kind of a more serious and drastic action to take here to do it in the project panel. It's going to be asking me, do you really want to delete those because they will completely disappear from your project? Yes, I really want to do that. And then I'm back in the beginning. So what do I want to do? I want to do something a little more interesting looking. One of the great things about working in After Effects is that it allows you to bring many different kinds of files and formats. So it allows you to bring many different kinds of designs to be animated. I created something, for instance, in Adobe XD. So I'm going to switch to Adobe XD. So I created this kind of simple interface element. It's a slider or a sliding element. You see I have a button that I can slide over this area. And I have it all set up, kind of ready to go. It's important to keep things organized. It's I guess the best professional recommendation that I can give is to keep things organized. So name your elements correctly. I have made components out of them. This is important too. so I can bring them in. I have two components that I have created. If I double click, let me double click on the components so you can see the elements. I have a slider button that is made out of 3 circles, and I have a slider area that is made out of a few shapes here. But basically, 2 things. One of the new additions to this workflow is actually the integration also of Adobe XD and Adobe After Effects. So let me show you something. I'm going to bring in this visual composition that I've made in XD into After Effects. How do I do that? Well, if you want to get everything that's on the scene here, and I do, you can click on the artboard, go under File, Export, and then see you have the option to actually go directly into After Effects. This is a huge improvement, I think, to the workflow. So I'm gonna select that. It's gonna take a second, and then perfect. I've got the same elements that I created in XD. They are in After Effects here. The artboard became my composition size. So you see the composition here. It has the size of my artboard. And I have 3 layers. The 3 layers are the 3 layers that I also have in XD. I have a slider button, I have a slider area, and a background, which is locked, and it was locked actually in XD as well. If you see that little padlock, it means that it's the background is locked here. So let's see if we can do like some animations. One thing that I noticed is that my timeline, it's really long. If you look at, I have many seconds. I have 20 seconds. I mean, it goes all the way up to 1 full minute, and that's too much for me. So I want to change the settings of this composition a little bit. How do we do that? I would go to the menu, so the top menu, composition, and then composition settings. I actually like to use the shortcut a lot. It's Command K. Composition settings to change the settings of the composition. So if you notice here, you'll see a few things that are a little bit different from the last one. A couple of things jump out. One is the frame rate. Right here I have 60 frames per second. I'm going to change that back to 30. Okay, so I like to work in 30 frames per second most of the time. I'll do that for this demo. And the duration right now, it says 1:00:00, which means we have 1 full minute, and that's too much. So I'm gonna also change this back to not 50 but 5 seconds. So I just want 5 seconds on this. All right, so I also want to zoom in a little bit, so you can use the zoom tool, zoom in. Oh, but maybe that's too much. If you hit option key, you zoom out. How can I maybe fit the window in this composition area? Well, there's like a useful zoom tool also in the composition panel, right underneath, to the left, drop down. You can choose fit or fit up to 200, which is my favorite. And if you choose that, it actually adjusts to the size of the panel. So I like that a lot, so I'm gonna keep it on that. So let's do a simple animation. Animating position. I'm gonna bring this button using the selection tool over to the left of this area. And you see slider button right there. I'm gonna open up the transform and the properties so I can see them. And then let's try to do some keyframing. All right. So I'm going to keyframe this position. It's going to be my A position, my starting position. And then I'm going to go all the way to the end of this comp, of the timeline, and then change the position to the opposite side. So one thing that we already learned that we could do is to hold the shift and just lie this over. And you see, I have the motion path, lines being drawn. If I move the playhead, I can see that I am animating that. I could also actually mess up with these numbers. The numbers are the coordinates for this position. So you can see my initial position has these two numbers, 294, 4, and 540 as the initial position keyframe. And I can change those numbers and then also change the position. So I'm going to put my playhead at the end once again. Okay, put that in there. And then the first number is the X coordinate and the second number is the Y coordinate. So if I do, if I hover over with my mouse, you see that it changes to a finger. So I can kind of click and hold and mess up with the finger there, and then change those numbers. So I can change the X value. For instance, I could change the Y value as well, and then it goes on a straight line. It's kind of a nice way to go on a straight line as well. I actually like to do that quite frequently. So I'm gonna put it on the other side of this interface. Okay, now let me play this. All right. So what is happening there? You see that there's like a green bar filling up, and it kind of, once it plays the first time, it plays kind of jaggy. It doesn't look great. When you do it for the first time, it's actually rendering a preview. So it may take a little longer. Sometimes it takes a long time, depending on the project you have. If you have too many layers, it's gonna take more time, definitely. If you have too many effects, it's gonna take more time. But it needs to render a preview. Once the bar is green, it means that it's being rendered, and then it can play that over and over in full quality to us. So now I have an animation, as you can see there. It's just a little bit weird because my button goes to the right, it disappears, and then it pops back in the beginning again, which is not ideal. But it takes exactly 5 seconds to go across that area, that space, right? So I'm gonna stop, spacebar, stop it. What happens if I bring this keyframe? Remember, this is my ending position at the end. What happens if I bring it over here? You can move the keyframes anywhere over time. So what happens if I bring it to, let's say, 2 seconds? What do you think is gonna happen? So I'm bringing that from roughly 5 seconds to 2 seconds. I'm gonna play. Let's watch the difference. And then it stops. So you can see that, right? So I'm basically making my motion, I'm making this action faster. It was taking 5 seconds for the button to do that, and now I'm doing that in only 2 seconds because I am bringing those keyframes closer. There is less time in between them, so it's faster, it's happening faster. Once it gets to that 2-second keyframe, there is no other keyframe after that, so that position stays the same. There's no change. So let's think about something here. What if I wanted to make this button start on the left, go to the right, and then come back to the same position on the left? Well, let's see if we can do that. I guess the only thing, really, that we are missing here is one keyframe at the end that'll make sure that the button, the white circle that I have, is back at the A position in the beginning. Now the A position, if you remember, is this one. And I have a keyframe there for that position. So in theory, if we think about it, I would need that same value right at the end. So I have that same position again. So one thing I could do is I could try, I'll put my playhead at the end and then I could try to bring it over here, right? And that could work. I guess I'm keyframing, I have a new keyframe. But if I want to be precise, so I'm going to undo that. If I want to be precise, I can do this. I can actually copy the first keyframe. Copy that. So I'm going to do a Command C. Paste it at the end of the timeline. So I'm going to do a Command V. And now you can see I have a new keyframe there, a new diamond shape. And look, the button, it's back at its original position. Now if I play this, interesting. Okay, I think I succeeded. I have a back and forth movement. It's playing as a loop, so I can see that over and over. One thing that may be bothering me is that I have two different speeds, right? And the reason why I have two different speeds is that it reaches the right-hand side in 2 seconds, and then it goes back to the left-hand side in 3 seconds. So it's, the difference of time to do those trips show that we have different speeds happening. How can I fix that if I want to? Well, if I want to fix that, I want to keep my keyframes equally apart. So there is the same amount of time from the first to the second and from the second to the third. So I'm going to change the one in the middle. It's marking 2 seconds there. I'm going to change that to half of my timeline, and that would be 2 seconds and 15 frames. So remember that I have 30 frames per second, 30 FPS in this project. So half of a second is 15 frames. So if I do that, I'm actually, I have perfect symmetry as far as the spacing of the keyframes here. So now I'm gonna play this one more time and we're gonna watch and see if it's consistent in terms of speed. It's rendering. And there you go. Great, this is our first animation. We're going to be looking at how we can render this in a few minutes, but I just wanted to get the first animation using position. Basically, it's a horizontal position animation. I wanted to demonstrate that first. I'm going to hit the space bar to stop it. And I'm going to look at my project panel once again. So remember that I told you that everything that we bring in should be in here. So look at how those things could be interesting. If I start twirling those elements, you'll see that I have imported a bunch of stuff from XD, right? I have imported even the symbols, the elements that make up these illustrations, right? So these visual elements that I created before. So let's say, what if I wanted to add more of these elements in here? What can I do? Well, you have a slider area and a slider button that I have created and imported in this section here. So I could, for instance, if I wanted to, just bring them over, slide them over, and now I have 2 buttons. Okay, so I have different instances of that now. And then I could do some cool animations with those 3 buttons instead of 1. I could also, I'm going to delete that, bring the slider, so I can have 2 sliders if I want to. Okay, and it's a way of adding complexity to the project. I actually like that. I'm going to keep that in there. And I'm going to add another button, so I have another thing to play with. So by dragging from the panel here, I can add more. I can also duplicate what I have already in my layers. So right now I see 1 slider area and 2 slider areas. Those are the 2 long shapes, and 1 button. What if I wanted another button? Well, I can duplicate it, and then I have 2 instead of 1. If I move this up now, oh, look at that. It's kind of weird. I'll explain to you what that means. But now I have 2 buttons, and I have a curve. Well, that's my motion path, the one we saw at first when we start animating, right? So if we have 2 keyframes, let's say representing 2 different positions, it draws a line, and that line is exactly showing the trajectory of the element. So I just copy the first button, and the button had already some keyframes. The fact that I moved the button in kind of mid to end waypoint up, I'm actually changing the trajectory. So I created another keyframe there that you can see here in the timeline, just by moving that element all of a sudden. So you have to be careful with that. If you want to start fresh, it's better to delete those keyframes and start fresh. One thing also that I think it's useful, I just hit a shortcut. It's the letter U. And that shortcut, it's for visualizing the keyframes, all of the keyframes that you have in a given layer. So I use it all the time. It's really useful. So I'm going to delete the slider button because I'm going to do something a little more clean. I'm going to use the slider area that I have. I'm going to bring another button from here. I'm going to try to do my best to keep it centered. And let's see. Going back to the beginning, I'm going to put this back at the beginning as well. So I'm just moving the one that doesn't have keyframes now. And I want to look at position, so I want to animate the position of my second one as well. So we learn that we can twirl, see transform, and see all of the properties. There is also a shortcut just for looking at the position property. I can go, I can click on the shortcut, and then I see position property, and then I can start keyframing that. The shortcut for position is the letter P. So it's quite easy. If I hit P, it shows and hide the position property, so I can keyframe that. So let's say I'm gonna keyframe this position here. So it starts with the other one. So I'm gonna see the keyframes for the 2, all right? And then let's say I go to the end, and I want this also to go to the end, and it's drawing the motion path, and everything looks good. And then I go to the end here, and then I can copy the first keyframe. So basically I'm repeating the same thing I did before, but with a different element. Play that, and it looks good. Now, what if I want to do like a slightly different animation on this new slider, on the one I just added to the screen? What if I wanted to pause my button? Can I pause the button in the middle of the animation. Can I do that? How can I do that? Well, yes, of course we can do it. If you think about it, for me to pause this element in the same spot, I have to keep it in the same position place for a number of frames. So I'm gonna stop it. Right now, it never, it's constantly in movement because I go from one keyframe to the other and they are different, so there is no pausing in the same spot. But if I take that middle keyframe, for instance, I copy it, and then let's see, I'm gonna start a little bit earlier. I'm gonna paste it in there. So now it's gonna reach the end a little sooner than the first one. And look at this. Because those two keyframes are the same, there is no motion happening between those two. So this is a way of pausing the position of the element. I'm gonna play this real quick so you can get a sense of what it's doing. So it starts faster and then it holds and then it comes back together with the first one. Look at that. Spacebar and stops. If I wanted to make this reach the other end of the line or the screen even faster, I can do that just by bringing this keyframe closer to the first one. Therefore, there is less frames in between those two. It'll get there faster. I'm gonna hit the spacebar and you can see huge difference now. Okay, that's a little bit extreme for me. How can I make this a little more, let's say, elegant? So look at this. I'm gonna start looking at the symmetry again. I'm gonna put a keyframe on 2 seconds, and then the third keyframe on 3 seconds, and the last keyframe will stay at 5. But if I do that, I'll have kind of a balanced motion. So it holds there, it comes back. Aha, interesting, huh? Okay, now let's try to do something else. I'm gonna go back to XD and bring something different into my project. So let me look for another element here. So I have an element called a switch. I'm gonna bring that in. Okay, and I have a little on and off switch kind of thing. So again, recapping those steps, I'm selecting the artboard, file, export, After Effects. And here's the switch with a button and the switch area. I'm gonna zoom in. You'll notice that if you zoom in too much, things start to look pixelated. Well, it's very similar to what you would see in Photoshop. If you zoom in to a point that it's gets too close, you start to see the pixels themselves. Remember, this is a pixel environment. And right now, again, I have it because it came from XD. I guess it comes with 1 minute, so I'm gonna change the composition settings. So Command Q to change that. I'm gonna change to 30 frames per second and 5 seconds in the composition as well. Okay, I'm gonna try something different so you can have a different taste of the things that you can do. So on the switch button, I'm going to bring, I guess I need to, I have to do a little trim, it looks like. So what happened here, I changed the composition settings to 5 seconds, remember? And I click OK. And then I'm trying to find like the ends of my bars in this composition here. I could find the end on the left hand side, so I can adjust that, but I could not really have access to the other end of it. Because it needs to be trimmed on the right side. This happens sometimes, and it's an easy fix. I'm just gonna do a trim to work area. And then you might be asking me, so I guess a good time to talk about this. What is the work area? The work area is it's the area of preview, and it's something that you can define yourself. There's another slider on top of these layers. It's this one. It has two blue handles, and you can use that to adjust and say highlight a section of your project, a section of your composition, a section of your timeline, and this becomes your work area. Why would you do that? Well, sometimes you just want to preview a section of it instead of the whole composition or timeline, and you can use the work area and then preview just that. If you look at the preview panel, you will see that under range it says work area. So if I play this, it will only play that section itself. So it's a very, very useful thing to actually make use of, especially once you get into more complex projects. Sometimes you spend like many minutes working on a couple of seconds of the animation, and then it's really useful to kind of select that short range for previewing and then fixing and previewing and then fixing and adjusting the keyframes and stuff. So right now it's set to trimming. I'm gonna do a trim to the work area and keep the work area at 5 seconds, just to see if I can. There you go. Just to see if I can move the right end of this layer over here. So okay, what happened? My button disappeared, and why is not there anymore? Well, I just reduced the length of that layer to a 1 second. So if I have my playhead over here, there is nothing. Only once the playhead is over that bar, I have it visible. So now if I play this, it disappears, right? After the 1 second mark, it disappears. Now, I want to share a different kind of animation, because we are looking at animations using the keyframes and then seeing that transition. We can kind of see the object move. But sometimes in real life, the action could be so fast that you really don't see, I mean, your eyes, the human eye doesn't see it. Doesn't have the ability to see it. So I'm going to be simulating that. So check this out. I'm going to be duplicating this button, the one I have in here. I'm gonna move the bar to after the first one. So right now I have 2, and there's no change in the composition, I mean the image itself. The only difference is that if I play now, the button will stay visible for 2 seconds, and the reason for that is because I have 2 that look exactly the same, one after the other, okay? One after the other. And okay, that's maybe kind of interesting, but look at this. If I had hit P for position, and without keyframing or anything, I'm just gonna put this one on the right hand side. So right now, remember, I have 2, a little more. I have 2, one on this side and then another on this side. Now look, this is also an animation. So I'm going from one image to another and one image to another, see? Let me play this. So it's a quick shift of motion, which it's also something that we can do. Now, if I when I have this going back and forth, I could duplicate the first one, put it after the second, duplicate the second. For duplicating is Command D. You can also find duplicate under Edit, Duplicate. So I'll put this after that, and then I guess this one after that. So let's see how that looks. Let me play this. Now look. Now it's a different kind of animation. I'm not using keyframes, I'm just changing the layers, and I have different layers in which the button is in different positions. But that's something that can be useful as well. Now one thing I'm noticing is that it's taking a little bit longer on the left side, on next to the red circle, and that's because I have the exact same information on the first and the last images here. Okay, and that's the reason why I have it like that. Okay, so let's get something else. I want to show you something else as well. Let me get something from XD again. Now let's open the dial. Let's look at the dial. Maybe do some rotations. So again, I'm going to be exporting. Sorry, I forgot to select the artboard. Exporting to After Effects. Great, I've got the dial in. I have set it up in XD, so it's always useful to think about how you're going to be animating, so you can build in XD in a way that it's easy for you later, for animating later. So I have it set as two elements, face and an arm, kind of a clock kind of thing. And I want to animate the arm, and I want to do a rotation. Rotation is the letter R if I want to go by shortcut. I can also use the twirl, and then I have a rotation there. So I'm gonna stopwatch and make a keyframe on rotation 0, okay? And then I'm gonna go to, let's say, the end. Oh, it's showing me 1 minute again. So I have to do a little bit of composition settings. So top menu, composition settings, or Command K. Change that to 5 seconds and change the frame rate to 30. Oh, I think I made a mistake. I think I've put 45 seconds instead of 5. Let me do a quick fix there. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now I'm at the end, my playhead is at the end, so I'm going to change my rotation. So let's say I want to have a rotation here of 1 full lap, like 1 full turn. I can do it by degrees, but I have this number before with an X that represents many times, or many full 360 degrees, like many full turns. So I can say, well, do 1 complete spin there. So from 0 to 1. Now let me play this. And it's kind of messed up, right? So it's kind of messed up. So what is happening here? What's the problem here? Well, the problem is that it's my anchor point. My anchor point is not in the right place. Therefore, it's spinning around an area that is not the area I need to get the effect that I need from this animation. So I'm going to stop this, go back, select this. So now I can see where the anchor point is. I'm going to zoom in so it's easier for you to look at it as well. See, the anchor point is right there at the center of the rectangle that represents the image. So I have to place it, and this is kind of tricky, so I may not get it right at first. I have to place it at the center of this circle, which is at the center of my dial, okay? So if I do that, I should be able to fix my rotation, because now it is rotating around that pivot point, or that anchor point. Now let me zoom out so we can see this better. Very good. So that's how you do rotation. If I wanted to do something kind of quick in here as well, I could do, remember that you can duplicate, so I'm going to select the arm and the face. Do a Command D. So I have face 2, arm 2. I'm going to put that over to the top. And then I'm going to be moving this guy to the right. And then on my second arm, I'm going to look at the keyframes. And I'm going to play them. Now they're perfectly synchronized because they have the same rotation keyframe. Remember, this is not a position keyframe, it's a rotation keyframe. What if I wanted to make it so that the second one actually rotates faster? Well, think about that. So right now it's doing 1 full spin in 5 seconds. What if I make it so that it does 2 full spins in 5 seconds? Let me take a look. And now the one on the right is much faster, right? I mean, I can make it even more like crazy fast, changing that to maybe 5 or something. Another question that you may have is, well, what if I wanted it to go actually, instead of clockwise, counterclockwise? Well, the way you do that is by using negatives. So instead of 5, so instead of a 5 times spins, I can do a -5, and then it goes the opposite direction. If I were doing this by the actual degrees, I could also use negatives. Let me do one more crazy thing here. So I'm gonna keep that. So I have arm 2 and face 2. I'm gonna be duplicating that once again. So now I have 3. I have 3 dials. But on this last one, I'm going to duplicate just the arm. So I have 2 arms. So I'm going to duplicate arm 3. I have arm 4. And if I look at these keyframes for arm 4 and 3, they have the exact same value, which is -5 laps. So I want to make one of them a little slower and go into a different direction. So let's say arm 4 could be, instead of a -5, a -2. And now if I play this, I guess I'm missing. getting why one of them is not spinning right now for some funny reason. I guess it's this guy. Oh yeah, I think I changed both of the keyframes, so now it's a static. So I did that by mistake. So let me fix that. The first one needs to be starting at 0. And now if I play it, here we go. Pretty cool. The one thing we didn't look at so far is, as far as looking at the basic ways to animate these properties, is opacity and scale. I'm not going to look at scale in this specific demonstration. You can experiment yourself with things that you make. I mean, that's the whole point of this demonstration, is just to give you like a kick off, so you can start making your own stuff, making your own images and animating them. I do have a bit of a homework in a second, but just to show you the opacity, I'm gonna bring in something else from XD. I have to open it. And I have a file called lights. Yeah, I'm gonna go to that. So I have these 3 lights. Export After Effects. Here we go. Yellow, green, and red. So what can we do here? We can animate opacity. And opacity, the shortcut is T. Think about transparency, right? So I'm gonna do some opacity keyframing here. So starting with let's see, the red light, keyframing that. And then, oh, it's giving me a minute again, so I need to do the composition settings. So just a second. 30 frames per second. 5 seconds comp. So let's say once it reaches 1 second, I make it disappear. I can reduce the opacity to 0%, so it's now completely transparent. It's gone. And then I bring it back at 2, back to 100%, and then, oops, 0, 100. And then I'll let it stay at 100 there. So just to show you how opacity looks, I'm just gonna fix this. Okay, 100%. Let me play this. So maybe you can have some blinking lights or something, or anything that you think of in your project. Now I just had another idea of how to use this opacity here on the switch element with this idea of the blinking light. So maybe I can make these little dots blink. But the thing is, I want to show you something else. If you look at this element, it's a single element because I have created it that way in XD. So now it's like a full thing, it's all together. But what if I want to actually perhaps just to animate or do a little change in one of those parts. Now there's a way to do that. If you look at the layers, this is the switch area element, and it's a composition. All the compositions, they have this icon, which is basically a film strip with some shapes and colors. Now, if I double click on that layer, I'm actually able to get another timeline. Look at this, this is crazy. And now on this timeline, I have every single piece of that image. So basically the architecture, that was the architecture that I used to create these elements, these illustrations. I still have access to it here. So again, once again, it's really important to set up your files with care in XD or Illustrator, by the way. You can also make things in Illustrator, you can also make things in Photoshop and bring them here. But it's very important to organize them well, to label as much as possible, to name the elements as much as possible. So your life will be much, much easier here. So let's say I just double click on that. So let me do that again. So let me go back to, oops, that's too much. Okay, all my stuff. So this is the switch area. Again, it's a single element here. But if I double click on that comp, I open up the comp. So now I see I have a tab that says switch area, and these are all the elements that make it. So what if I want to make that red shape? And you see it's an ellipse, it has a star next to it, meaning that this is a different kind of layer. It's actually a shape layer, but I can twirl, and it has a few more options as far as contents, but I still have my properties. And I can also do an opacity animation here. Oh, by the way, I need to, I think I'm gonna work with this. I'm a little tired of changing the composition settings. Yeah, the composition settings is showing up as 1 minute. Well, let me do that. Change real quick. 30 frames per second, and then 5. Super quick. Okay. So let's make it blank. Now it's gone. From 100% to 0, and then back to 100. It gets to a point where I can actually start copying. So Command C, Command V, Command C, Command V. Now if I play this, you see the red dot, it's blinking because I just keyframed that single element here. Now, what do you think is going to happen in the main comp? Let's check it out. So if I go back to, oops, not that one. Oh, that's something for later. If I go back to this here, you'll see it's also blinking. I'm gonna zoom out a little. So I just wanted to show you these, that although these come as compositions, these come combined, you can actually still access the elements themselves, which makes us think, well, so what I'm looking at here is actually compositions inside compositions, and yeah, that's exactly what it is. You have nested compositions, and it's just a way of adding more complexity to these projects. So just to end this workshop today, I wanted to give you something to do yourself, something that you, it's going to be like the takeaway, and that hopefully it's going to be giving you more ideas for other things, new projects. So the idea is to make, try to make like a complex interface. So take all of these elements that we have and then do some kind of a crazy complex interface and animate as much as possible. Animate each and every part. Try to explore the keyframing of positions. Try to explore the keyframing of opacity. the keyframing of rotation. If you want to play around with scale, go for it, you know, be adventurous. The goal is to create a complex looking animation of this interface. If you want to create things in XD and bring it in, be my guest. It's all about your creativity and your imagination now. Now, once you have your design, once you have it all keyframed and playing nicely, we need to render the movie. So this will be the last bit that I need to show you. But of course, we haven't saved our project yet, so I need to do that as well. So let's save this project first. I'm going to do a save as and save the project so I don't lose it. And I'm going to call it workshop. I'll save it in my desktop. Perfect, there you go. Now it's all saved, I won't lose that. And then I'm ready to render this movie. So I have it set with 5 seconds for your homework. Here's something else you can do. Try to do a seamless loop. This is very interesting if you can. It's kind of an extra level of challenge, but it could be something fun. To do something that plays without jumps or gaps, so that once it reaches the end of the animation, it's back at the beginning. So it's kind of a seamless, never-ending animation. You can try that as well. But for the homework, try to do something complex. It could be 5 seconds long, it could be 10 seconds long. Experiment, try, use your creativity. I'm gonna render a movie just to show you how to render something so that you have an output. Back in the day, we used to do a lot of the rendering through the render queue here in After Effects, and you still can use that, but lately Adobe has been kind of pushing us to do the media encoder, which is basically another piece of software that comes with the package. It comes with not only Creative Cloud, but it's like a partner to After Effects. It works in conjunction, so I'm gonna add to Adobe Media Encoder queue to make this render. So I'm gonna click on that. It's under composition, and usually it takes a little bit of a while because it needs to open another program. So we're gonna wait a little bit. Okay, so we are back in the Adobe Media Encoder. And right now my file, it's in the queue, and oh boy, it took me a long time. It took my computer a long time to get here. I do much prefer the traditional way of doing this. So maybe this is something we can put in our homework too, how to have a better rendering setup from After Effects. I just think it's this is a little bit nuts. But anyway, I'm in the Adobe Media Encoder. The file, it's in the queue, and you see that it says H264. So it's kind of out of the box. It's kind of showing well, I was going to say the most popular compressing, but I guess I would say not only the most popular, but the best compressing codec, which is H264 for most of your needs, and also for this workshop. It'll give you a medium bitrate quality, which is pretty good. It's pretty good for the web, by the way, and for sharing, publishing in general. Of course, you can get better quality than this by tweaking. Remember, all of these blue information things, they're clickable, so you can change those settings as well. And also, it's saving on my desktop. All right, so it shows where it's saving. If I wanted to change where this is gonna be saved, I can click on that and change that as well. But I'll keep it like that. I'm just gonna hit this button to start the queue, and then basically to start rendering. So let me do that. And I'm guessing this is not gonna take too long. So it's thinking a little bit. Almost finished. And it looks like it's done. I got a green check mark. Now if I look on my desktop, I should be able to find the folder with the file. And now I have an MP4. It's a video file, which I can then preview. All right, so I don't have keyframes on mine, so it's not really in motion yet. But again, this will be part of the homework. I hope you enjoy this workshop session. We will have a couple more to show you more tips and to improve your skills in After Effects, especially for your prototyping needs. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you.